Good evening and welcome to, excuse me. Welcome to the smoking section. My name is Emily Ouija and I'm hosting tonight with a very special guest, Mr. John Ouija, who happens to be related to me, I think, in some way. He's partly responsible for bringing me into the world, my father. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
Great to have you here.
Good to be here, yeah.
So one reason I wanted to ask you to be on the show, for one thing, is because you live in the Netherlands, so I don't see you very often, and when you're visiting, it seemed like a good chance to have you on the show because you're a smoker. You're retired, is that correct?
For 6 years.
For 6 years, okay. Now, one thing I found interesting that we were talking about recently was that you actually started smoking quite late in life compared to a lot of other people. I think you were 40 when you started, is that right?
Not quite. It was, yeah, nearly. It was 39. And the context was in Athens, Greece. It didn't seem to be a big, it was sort of, it fit in naturally in that environment in Greece at that time.
What do you mean by that it fit in naturally in that environment?
Well, it was, at that time, might still be to some extent, it was just very, very common to see people smoking in public and well, everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just started, not for any particular reason, but
you just sort of picked it up, as it were.
Yeah.
And did you enjoy it right away? Was it something that you felt like, wow, where has this been all my life? Or
Yeah, I mean that would be too dramatic to put it that way. It just didn't. It didn't seem to be. That there was no opinion that dictated against it, and it seemed to be kind of a natural thing to do. It felt like a more outdoor existence there because of the warm climate.
Mm-hmm.
And relative simplicity of the neighborhoods we were living in. A lot of time spent outdoors. It didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It was just seemed to be a kind of a transparent evolution of being there that I didn't really give much thought to why or not or.
Mm-hmm. Just seemed like a natural thing that you picked up at that point in your life. Yeah, that's interesting actually that you bring up Greece because we hadn't talked about that before. And from what I understand right now, even in Greece, from what I've heard, I haven't been there in many years, but that there actually are, it's part of the European Union. There are supposedly indoor smoking bans in place, but that the citizens of Greece tend to just sort of blatantly ignore them, and that people still smoke inside a lot of cafes and bars. And I think that fits along with what I remember living there, although I was very young when we lived there. But
yeah, I wouldn't want to get too far off issues here, but to me the population there was, probably still is to some extent, in many ways, generally automatically in open opposition to any regulation about anything.
how is that right?
I mean, taxes would be a big important one that
Right.
could use as an example.
That's interesting that you say that. That makes sense.
And of course, low price of tobacco at that time. It was an unregulated product. There was no state revenues significantly coming from tobacco sales.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe.
Mm-hmm.
And for the end consumer, it was not a noticeable expense.
Mm-hmm.
And having said all that, I've had the same experience in visiting your brother, our other family member in China.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years.
Yep.
Where you would think with state, or I would think with state regulation of a lot of things, that an end user product like tobacco might be more regulated, but seems not to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen extremely low prices there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's all those things.
That's interesting. I know that you prefer menthol cigarettes right now. Is that what you started smoking when you first started?
No, they weren't available in Athens at that time. I didn't give much thought to it. After 2 years there, we returned to the States, although I was only returned for 1 year before I went to The Hague.
Mm-hmm.
I just happened to choose it and try it back in the States.
Mm-hmm.
A menthol brand that I preferred at that point.
Mm-hmm.
By that time, a couple of years later, that was something I found that I preferred,
Mm-hmm.
and I continued as I could when I got to Holland in The Hague.
So you're living in the Netherlands right now, and I mentioned this to you the other day, and
I didn't know about it.
you were not aware that there's actually there's the European Tobacco Products Directive stipulates that that menthol flavoring is going to be completely banned. I think it's going to be phased out over the next 4 years, so that a complete ban will be put in place in 2020, which means that you're not going to be able to get menthol cigarettes anymore. And actually, something funny about that is I remember, I think it was in 2013 that Helmut Schmidt, who was the former chancellor of Germany, and he was very well known as being a chain smoker of menthol cigarettes. And I think when he heard about this coming ban, he actually supposedly stockpiled menthol cigarettes at the time. And unfortunately, he ended up passing away in 2015. So he's not going to actually live to see this ban in place. But when you hear that, I mean, you hadn't heard about that before. How does that make you feel? Are you concerned?
No, I didn't actually know about it. That's in that detail. It doesn't surprise me. It fits into the change I've seen in only 2 years' time. A particular brand that I was buying, I was preferred buying when there in that country, because I've been there just over 30 years. So in all of the 30 years, up until 2 years ago, I was choosing the same brand consistently, and stable, no change in packaging, looked the same. It has, in 2 years, gone through a continuous evolution to something slightly different. So I'm not surprised that that's the goal, or that's the eventual thing.
But does it concern you? I mean, do you think? What is that? It's 3 years from now. What year is it? 2017. In 3 years' time, you won't be able to buy those anymore. Do you think you're gonna switch and start smoking regular cigarettes, or you're just not sure at this point what you're gonna do?
I honestly don't know. It doesn't seem that significant to me. I expect what I probably would do would choose something else for a while to see how I like it. What I'll do beyond that, I'm not sure.
Yep.
I don't feel that committed to having to find that.
It's interesting because I've never liked menthol cigarettes, so it's hard for me to imagine. But it just seems to me that if you've had a preference for such a long time, that might be hard to adjust. But I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is at a deeper level. I mean, does it bother you that this ban is going to be put into place? You know, do you feel like it's infringing on your right to choose the type of product that you want to consume?
Well, I have to say I don't feel strongly about it. It does reflect I think a similarity that I see between the public attitude in Holland compared to that in the States. It's not just a matter of relative population of the two countries. It's a pretty similar attitude that the UK is slightly different than Holland. Holland's slightly different, and the US, they're all slightly different, but the general trend in the public attitude is even and certainly at government level, if there is a plan to take a certain type of cigarette out of availability. And I guess I find that as a change is introduced, and when I look at the alternatives, each time I find myself adjusting somewhat. I have to say I don't look at it in terms of personal freedom.
Okay.
It's a trend that changes in many ways, like density of traffic affecting driving changes that experience. I don't see it as being that different.
Okay, fair enough. You mentioned the UK because I know you spend quite a bit of time in the UK. Is that right?
I go fishing.
Go fishing. That's nice. Yeah. So I know that one thing I mentioned to you this weekend we were talking about these things a little bit was about plain packaging, and I think you've experienced that a little bit. Has it been more in the UK at this point, or also in the Netherlands?
The UK is more pronounced in
Not
that
at this
respect.
point, yeah. And I think that they're all at different kind of phases of implementation, but I know that, at least I believe that the intention is, and this is also part of that European Tobacco Products Directive, if I'm not mistaken, but is that actually plain packaging is really a misnomer, I feel I should mention, because it's not really plain packaging, it's actually that...
I have a sample of a graphic.
Oh, do you? That'd be great. Hold that thought, we actually have a phone call. Hi, you're on the smoking section.
Hello.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi, who is this?
Hi, Emily. This is David.
Oh, hi David, how are you?
It's good. I want to ask your father. I know in Holland has very liberal laws on broad. So how does that compare with its position on tobacco?
That's a great question.
Yeah,
I guess to put it
well, I think I would find it difficult to make a comparison in that the so-called liberal position relative to drugs is, I don't quite see it that way. The police involvement in drug enforcement at whatever level it happens to be, depending on what the substance is, that there is a police involvement, and I've never seen police involvement relating to tobacco, so I think it would be stretching it to make some connection or some comparison between the two. To me, the tobacco issue there is more of a ground level public attitude, which may be developed by advertisement. And I mean, if I would we show you, and I don't know how visible.
We're not
that
visible,
is.
but we're gonna kind of put it up closer to the
That's the kind of
camera.
packaging I'm buying now.
So you can see that. I mean, I personally, it always kind of bothers me that this is known as plain packaging, because as you can see, it's really anything but plain packaging. This actually has in Dutch. Smoking causes heart attacks in large letters, and it has
Or might say infertility.
whatever malady it might cause. And actually, it's great that you show this, because one thing I was going to show a graphic. In November last year, a Spanish man actually said he was suing health officials in Spain because he discovered that a photo of himself was being used on a cigarette pack. And I'm gonna pull up this graphic right now. There we go. So this is actually the photo of I actually don't have his name written down, but he was a 54-year-old man from Galicia, and it shows him hooked up to a breathing apparatus with the warning: smoking can cause embolisms and disability. And he claims that the picture was taken while he was undergoing surgery for a spinal surgery, which was completely unrelated to smoking. And so he was actually quite angry when he saw this being used on a cigarette pack. So yeah, I just think that most people aren't really aware that the photos that are being used on packs are not necessarily of smokers. They're just using them as advertising in a sense. And I think we're all aware in a greater sense in society that advertising is not necessarily always truthful. But I think when people see these health warnings on packs, they assume that what they're seeing is actually the direct result of smoking, which is not necessarily the case.
So in connection with that kind of graphic packaging, I can only speak as an individual in buying that. In traveling here and bringing a supply of cigarettes with me as I could fit into the suitcase. Every pack looks like that. Each one is a little slightly different in what specific photos you might see.
Yep.
If I'm not mistaken, I've actually, might even have a pack with me that has the photo that Emily just showed on screen.
Oh, is that right?
It looks familiar anyway, but I have to say, as an individual in buying them, I maybe I'm immune to the photo that I'm seeing. I don't think that much about it, so I don't know how other people react to it. But that's the kind of public attitude influence that is there.
We actually have another phone call. Hi, you're on the smoking section. Hello?
Steve here.
Is that Steve?
Steve here.
Oh, hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
And did you have a question for John?
In the United States, smokers are different. In the United States, it seems that smokers are considered a class, almost a social class.
A social class, uh-huh.
This is something that's been engineered over the last 30 or 40 years. Is it similar in Holland?
So I guess...
I know what you're referring to, and I've experienced the identification of me as being part of that class occasionally, and because my visits here are not that frequent over 30 years' time. I have to say that in Holland, I don't have the same experience. No, I don't.
Well, can you elaborate on that? Because I'm not sure I...
Except at work, where I haven't been for some time, that developed as a local culture. Although I have to say, because I worked for an American-based organization or American influence organization, that aspect of culture carried through in the workplace there. I have to point that out. But in general, out on the street, I would say that I don't think there's the same level of identification that you're referring to.
But to clarify, are you talking about stigma? The stigma that you feel smoke? Okay, yeah. Because I'm not quite clear on the question. I think that there's another layer to that I'll get back to. But so you're referring to that you feel more stigma actually in the United States as a smoker.
Yeah.
Is that right? I would agree with that, having spent a lot of time in the Netherlands as well. Although the last time I lived there was 10 years ago, so I think a lot has changed in the world since then. But I'd agree that I think it is less there. And would you say the same thing is true in the UK? How do you feel that compares?
I don't think I could make much of my visits tend to be out in the countryside, and most of my time is spent alone on some small river. I'm not qualified to make a comparison about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I mean, I guess you could say, I was thinking about this the other day. I guess you could say because of your lifestyle now, you're retired. You tend to stick to a certain routine. Home. I know that you like to play pool sometimes.
Yeah, I would say, getting closer to personal day-to-day experience. My wife is very much opposed to anybody smoking.
Oh, is she?
But
yeah. Well, I noticed that you don't smoke inside the house anymore, whereas you used to. I think up until about 10 years ago, or.
Oh, it's been more, probably 15, 17 years since I've smoked a cigarette inside my own residence.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know if it's very interesting to this audience or in this setting, but I have a routine that's pretty obsessively, clinically clean about the way I handle it.
Yeah.
Not strangely, it's for my own, it's the way I prefer of handling it. You know, I don't accumulate a lot of butts. I field strip a cigarette and throw this filter away separately.
So,
Use the cigarette part as part of garden fertilizer. I mean, I could get pretty extreme in what I'm
Right.
describing.
right. Well, so
That's evolved slowly though. So.
Right. Well, at this point, would you say that you prefer smoking outdoors, or do you ever miss any situations where you could smoke indoors in the past? I mean, when you're playing pool, for example, do you ever miss?
No, we don't.
Really?
I've come to feel that I prefer being in an indoor space where I'm not smoking.
Interesting. I mean, I think a lot of us have been very influenced. I think, even people like me who, I do quite miss being able to smoke inside bars. I miss being able to smoke in other situations. Even I noticed that I think there's been a certain amount of, brainwashing in a sense of just that we've all gotten used to being in areas that don't have smoke in them anymore. So even people like me who might intellectually feel like I definitely miss smoking indoors, and I feel like it's a violation of the rights of smokers to not have spaces where we can smoke indoors. Even I noticed that I've become somewhat accustomed, unfortunately, I think, to spaces that don't have smoke.
I think when I miss it is, or let's say sitting at a dinner table at a cafe or restaurant outside somewhere and in conversation, not really because of the rules of the restaurant where we are, that it's not a natural thing to be able to light up there.
Right.
That's something that I.
Right. Yeah, and I'm only making this point, just to clarify, I'm not saying that I prefer areas where people aren't smoking. I just wanted to make the point that I think we've all been very much influenced by the fact that there were a widespread indoor smoking bans at a certain time, and I think we've just all been affected by that, whether we like it or not. To be honest.
You don't have a lot of time, but in the face, one thing I think is kind of interesting.
We still have a few minutes left.
Interesting anecdote in Holland when the widespread ban was first introduced. I'm going to say it's 10 years ago, but that's approximately the length of time.
That sounds about right.
There was a typical Dutch thing to do, to form a church. To identify formation of a church.
That is so strange that you're saying that.
Therefore, a religion that was based on smoking in service.
That is so strange you said that, because I was just this afternoon having a conversation with someone where we were tossing around that idea of actually being able to do that in the United States.
So it ended up being, I won't say laughed at and disallowed, but it didn't last very long, and it was specifically in Amsterdam was the headquarters of this church.
That's very interesting, because I was speculating today whether I actually think something like that might be more possible to do in the United States, because I feel like we have a very strong sense here of freedom of religion as part of our Constitution. So I think that might actually be something that would work better in the U.S. than in Holland, but I'm not sure. It's kind of an interesting idea.
Well, the other cultural thing is that a lot of our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, I'm still a citizen and I voted, I still vote here.
You don't have to tell us.
Still pay taxes.
You don't have to tell us who you vote for, don't worry.
No, that's not my intention, but when I say our, I mean that I still regard myself as a citizen. But a lot of the fundamental human rights present in our American Constitution are actually based on an early document in the Dutch Bill of Rights. It goes way back, probably 300 years or so, 400 years. So there are a lot of similarities in terms of personal rights as they are in the law of fundamental rights. A lot of similarities between the U.S. and the Netherlands.
Okay. Yep. Well, it's just an interesting idea. I think you mentioned that you don't really miss being able to smoke indoors, but I mean, this is just gonna be a last question. I mean, do you feel that people should have the right to choose, though? Especially in the U.S., where I think we have a very strong sense about private property. It does seem to me that it violates private property laws to tell landlords, people who own bars and pubs, that they can't choose whether their establishment is smoking or non-smoking.
Yeah, Yeah, I feel it's gone overboard in terms of top-down regulation of individual choice in a place of business, or most certainly in your own place of residence.
Right, right,
So yeah, in that sense, I think it
yeah,
can get out of balance, has in many cases, and that's the direction that.
yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. It's been great having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be checking in with you in the future about how the transition from menthol is going for you. Maybe we can have a repeat appearance on the show in the future. So I'm just going to put up our graphic. You can visit us if it comes up. It doesn't seem to be working. Well, anyway, thank you for joining us on the smoking section. Have a good night.